Are there further amendments? Mr. Shadegg.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
Gentleman seeks recognition to offer an amendment. And is it to this title? Clerk will inform us of the timeliness of the filing of this amendment.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it was received in time.
Clerk will please report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Shadegg.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the biggest controversies surrounding this legislation, which is intended to address global warming and greenhouse gas emissions, is the global nature of the problem. That is to say, the emission of carbon dioxide, which is sought to be controlled by this legislation, occurs not just in the United States but throughout the world. Many of us are deeply concerned that other countries around the world will not control their greenhouse gas emissions and will have a competitive advantage, and indeed that jobs will be lost from this country to countries which fail to impose any greenhouse gas emissions or any carbon dioxide emission limits. Indeed, yesterday during the questioning, Mr. Scalise pointed out that 55 pages of the current legislation are dedicated to job loss, and it was noted that that was because the proponents of the bill are genuinely concerned about taking care of those who might lose their jobs in the transition. This amendment is a simple and straightforward amendment. It goes not to suspension of the bill, just to the reporting of factual information and disclosure. It's an amendment that calls for transparency, sunshine, and public information. What the amendment says is that once per year, the Department of State and the U.S. Trade Representatives shall prepare a report to Congress regarding whether China and India have adopted greenhouse gas emission standards, and assuming they have not, will once a year notify members of Congress of their determination and will publicize that determination in the country. Obviously, Americans have a right to know whether greenhouse gas emissions are being restricted or capped or limited or restrained throughout the other parts of the world, but in particular in those nations which pose the greatest job threat to those of us in America and to American jobs and American workers. My colleague, Mr. Shimkus, has pointed out repeatedly that what we are trying to do on this side of the aisle is look out for the little guy whose job is threatened and try to make sure that indeed he has a chance under this legislation not to be punished or suffered. The proponents of this legislation argue compellingly, they believe that if we adopt the provisions of this bill, then other nations around the world, including, importantly, our biggest competitors in this field, China and India, will limit their greenhouse gases as well. And indeed, there is belief that if we take the passage of this legislation into foreign discussions and into conferences on the topics of greenhouse gas emissions and on global warming, the passage of this legislation will pressure those countries to limit their greenhouse gases. This amendment, I would hope, is non-controversial. It simply provides that once per year, a survey will be conducted to determine if China and India in particular, though it could be expanded to cover other countries as well, have adopted greenhouse gas emission standards similar to those or as strict as those here in the United States, so that we know we are limiting greenhouse gases throughout the world. Many of us are concerned that this legislation will result in jobs being moved from the United States because plants will close in the United States, go to other countries, and begin operating and will emit more greenhouse gases than those same plants would have emitted here in the United States. Clearly, the American people and members of Congress deserve to know what efforts are being made to limit greenhouse gas emissions elsewhere throughout the world, and particularly by our competitors around the world, to assure ourselves that we're not losing jobs to those countries. I believe it is a sound amendment. It provides information to the American people. It is critically needed. It provides information to members of Congress, and I would strongly urge its adoption.
Will the gentleman yield?
Certainly.
If we took that first sentence where we say the administrator in consultation with Department of State, U.S. Trade Representative shall annually prepare and certify a report to Congress regarding whether China and India have adopted greenhouse gas emission standards at least as strict as those standards are required under this act, and stop there, we could accept it. Would you be willing to make that accommodation?
Reclaiming my time, I guess I certainly would think about it. I'd be interested in knowing why you would not want the information reported, assuming it's gathered, or why you would not want it reported to members of Congress or the American people.
Well, you asked then they notify each member of Congress, release this to the media, seek to publicize such determination in congressional districts in the United States. That's that's a lot. This a lot of extra busy work. Once a report is out, I'm sure that members of Congress will take note of it.
Well, let's go through those one at a time. Certainly, Mr. Chairman, you would not have a problem with each member of Congress being notified, would you? That can't be very burdensome.
Well, it calls for a report to Congress. So you want each member notified as well. Most reports to Congress don't go separately to each individual member.
Yeah, regrettably.
You're not getting those reports, I gather.
I'm not. As low down the table as I am. Mr. Chairman, I would propose to leave the second sentence and strike to the word media and strike the balance of the sentence. So it's given to each member of Congress and released to the media. Certainly you can't be against that.
That sounds reasonable to me. Are you willing to accept a yes?
I've been trained pretty well to accept a yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Without objection, the amendment will be modified, and then now the question comes on this amendment. All those in favor of the Shadegg amendment as modified, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment's agreed to. Will someone inform Mr. Stearns?
And they say the Congress isn't bipartisan.